Welcome to the GSMC Business News Podcast, the show dedicated to keeping you up to date on all things concerning business, technology, and the stock market. Get a head start on the day as we keep you updated on the latest goings-on Wall Street, money, jobs, and technology. If you're looking for a podcast to keep you informed and ahead of the game in business, the GSMC Business News Podcast has you covered.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Business News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Paula DuPont, and today we have a lot of interesting business news to talk about. First and foremost, we're going to touch on the latest with the small business loans through the Payroll Protection Program. We're going to talk about state reopenings, impacts of the coronavirus to different businesses like JC Penney, also on the latest launch, of the forthcoming launch of the Apple iPhone 12. We're going to talk about artificial intelligence and its role helping businesses. And then finally, we're going to look at consumer spending. So hope you stay with me and we'll explore these topics in just a moment. So last week, Congress passed the second stimulus package that has come out since the start of the coronavirus as a way to help businesses deal with the effects to them because of the virus and business shutting down. The president signed that package and it became available today for small businesses to apply for loans through. So the package is part of what they're calling the Payroll Protection Program, and it was designed to provide loans for small businesses to help them pay their employees or perhaps hire back their employees who they might have already laid off or furloughed. So the whole idea is to keep people being paid and to keep small businesses going when it seems pretty dire for them right now and they're struggling to survive. In the first round of loans, which offered about $342 billion to small businesses, those funds were depleted in a matter of 13 days. There was a huge deluge of applicants for it, including applicants who otherwise had access to capital that they could use because they're part of bigger corporations. And a lot of that came to light during the process when these loans were being assigned and or being accepted. And, the criticism drove pressure for some to give the money back. And where those who weren't pressured, the Secretary of the Treasury had come out with a plea for them to return the money. Those companies who are publicly traded and who could otherwise draw from other funds to give the money back. So some have and some haven't. And I'm not sure if that's going to end up being a battle somewhere or not. I think it all depends on how many small businesses are actually going to be able to take advantage of this new offering that opened up today. So today the system opened, E-Tran system that the Small Business Administration uses to take loan applications. And evidently within the first hour, the system shut down because of problems. It was just overloaded and apparently, wasn't designed well enough to handle the flood of applications. So presuming that gets back into place or gets working again, there's going to be, a tremendous amount of activity expected there. I know that there are 5 of the largest banks apparently have $1 billion available collectively to offer through the loan program, and even they were shut out of the system today when it broke down. So there's an awful lot of need. There is money available. The banks are looking to use the system to make it available. It's just a matter of, is the system going to be able to handle it? I mentioned before that there are companies who voluntarily gave back the loans that they got, and some who did after increased pressure from the government and others to do so. So I just wanted to mention a couple of them. I've talked about them a little bit before, like Shake Shack. Ruth's Chris initially had taken the money, was keeping it, but then they had decided to give it back as well. A company, Potbelly Sandwiches, the sandwich chain, they had a $10 million loan, which they gave back. Apparently, there's been 13 firms, public firms, that will return almost $170 million back to the government to disperse. And it's estimated that those funds that were returned could provide up to 825 loans. And that's if, of course, the loans average in size about $206,000. I believe now in the first round with the rules, I believe that the max that a company could get was $10 million. But some of these larger companies got more than that, but it's likely that they did that through different subsidiaries or groups. One company, for instance, AutoNation Inc., which is one of the largest car dealership chains, they gave back $77 million that it got through the program. So again, I'm not sure quite how they were able to secure that amount, but at least that amount is going back into the funding that should be available to businesses. And it was, I saw a story earlier today of a businessman who owns a couple of pizza restaurants, and he had said that he had applied through the first offering and did everything right. He actually went through the bank that he's used before, that he's done his banking with, because that was supposed to be an advantage according to someone who advised him. And with that, he did not get approved. And when he saw the larger corporations who did get approved, he was pretty upset about it. And it would seem that he said that he's applying again. He's hoping that he'll take advantage this time around. And he said the reality is that if he doesn't get a loan through this next offering, he's not going to be able to keep his restaurants open. And I think that's a resounding message heard from throughout the country with small businesses like his who aren't part of a bigger chain, aren't publicly traded. They're going to struggle. And, it's just unfortunate that not only will companies who've been around a while, maybe even been passed down through generations, but I know of an instance of a couple of smaller regional restaurants that were all ready to open and had actually just, gotten everything in place, hired staff, did the renovations of the restaurant, secured all the supplies, was ready to go, got the licensing, everything was in place, and the unfortunate timing of it was they were ready to open just moments practically before the lockdown occurred. So you figure the kind of money that's tied up into opening a new business, what's entailed with that, and then not being able to even launch it, never mind keep it going. So I think there's still going to be a lot more pain out there with this program because there probably isn't a number high enough that would be able to cover all the small businesses that are struggling. It's just hopefully in this round that's going to continue again tomorrow, hopefully more of the little guys will get their loans and stay viable. So we're going to take a break, and in a moment we'll be back and we'll talk about state reopenings.
You really can't underestimate the importance of having the right creative work for your brand or your product. Whether it's a logo, a website, a book cover, or an ad campaign, you really need a quality design to make that big difference pop and deliver your overall engagement and success in a competitive market. That's where Design Crowd comes in. Design Crowd has over 750,000 designers from Sydney to San Francisco ready to help you with awesome creative ideas. They make crowdsourcing work for you. So if you need a logo or you're working on your creative branding, you can go to designcrowd.com and post a brief describing the design you need. And then within about 2 to 7 days, you'll receive up to over 100 different designs from designers around the world. Then you pick the best design and approve payment to the designer. So you're only paying for the design that you want. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of freelancing and out of crowdsourcing. And you don't have to be a huge company like Harvard Business School to use Design Crowd, although they have used it as well. You can start a project on Design Crowd for as little as $99. And if you go right now to designcrowd.com/health and wellness or enter the promo code health and wellness on their website, then our health and wellness listeners will receive up to $150 off of your design project. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness or entering that promo code health and wellness.
Are you looking for a podcast that gives you all of the latest news from the world of finance? Then check out the GSMC Financial News Podcast. We'll delve into the ups and downs of the stock market, changes in the economy, and news from the world of real estate and technology. From breaking news on the New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, or the overseas market, to updates on the bond market, if there's money to be made, we'll cover it on the GSMC Financial News Podcast.
Hi, I'm back. And as I mentioned, we're going to talk about reopenings. And when you talk about businesses reopening, which for a lot of us we're eagerly awaiting, that depends on the state that you live in and what their governors are saying. And as we know, 97% of Americans are currently under some sort of stay-at-home order in their states. And the president has deferred, although releasing a grander plan for what some of the criteria should be and determining when states can loosen some of the restrictions and start to open up businesses. He has deferred those decisions to the governors to do that. So the guideline that that magical date that some are looking at is May 1st. And of course that's this week. And it really, again, varies widely across the country in how it's being looked at if anybody is reopening or loosening restrictions at all at that time. So that really kind of runs the gamut. One state, Georgia in particular, started to ease restrictions last Friday of last week, April 24th. And they allowed gyms, fitness centers, bowling alleys, tattoo parlors, hairdressers, nail salons, massage therapists, barber shops, So all of those were allowed to open on April 24th with restrictions. The restrictions were going to be social distancing. So, you had to be a certain number of feet apart from another customer or another gym member, and health screening for employees, so that the places were considered safe. And I'm sure there's other guidelines as well. It struck me when I saw an image of someone getting a tattoo last Friday. Not that I have anything against tattoos. It's just that it's such a strong visual image when you consider, all the social distancing that we've had to do. And there isn't much more intimate of a situation than getting a tattoo. Now, of course, there's gloves involved and sanitary conditions that are required and are taking place. But again, it's that initial shock. It's just like sometimes when you watch certain TV programs and you see footage of, baseball games or concerts or people, hugging other people on a show, and you bristle at first because it's like, wow, we don't do that. It's become very awkward. So seeing some of these businesses open up is a little jolting, just because we've been away from that for so long. So that's happening. Then you have other states like in California, for example, where over the weekend some overhead visual images came out of crowded beaches where there were a lot of people there, and they weren't 6 feet apart, they weren't 6 feet apart or anything close to that. And evidently it drew a good bit of attention by the governor, who said, if people aren't getting it, if they don't get the rules of social distancing, we're not going to be able to open up. And as far as I know, at this point, there is no date in mind for when these restrictions and stay-at-home orders are going to come down in California. I think that's still being determined. And they're still, from what I understand too, I believe they're still climbing the curve here. I don't know that they've plateaued yet or on the flatter end of it. So, you have different extremes going on, and it's going to be interesting. The other thing is that states are making pacts with area states, and I think that's actually a good thing, because, the behaviors don't end at the border when people work or travel back and forth to other states in the neighboring area. And so you have to do it in tandem with the states around you. And to do it in isolation just doesn't make any sense, and probably sets you up for failure. So in California, I believe, he's part of a pact with some Western states in looking at how they're going to open up businesses. So it's pretty interesting. And I think, as has often been said, one of the common themes of reopening for business, for states, is testing. And how are we going to make sure that employees are screened and we know that they're healthy to go back into the workplace and interact with other people? And how are we going to assure the safety of those coming into buildings, whether it's their place of work or whether it's as a customer or a theater goer, whatever the situation might be. What's interesting is you do hear different points of view about the whole outlook on the outbreak. I've heard people saying that, we with the fact that no vaccine is imminently going to be available until, maybe next year. And so far there isn't a viable treatment that is anywhere near approval and being widely available. I should just say plain out, there's nothing on the horizon that's been approved or looks like it's being close to being approved. But with those factors and the fact that, the virus continues to spread, there's some that seem to have this idea that it's going to be around for the next year, maybe 18 months, and that we need to just brace ourselves for it. And perhaps it's like exposure therapy. We need to start living life and getting out there and kind of hope for the best. And I saw a clip on a news program with a little interview with the mayor, I think it was Jersey City, New Jersey, where they just opened up parks today for the first time since the lockdown. And the idea is, at some point, we're going to have to venture out. We're going to have to let people get out a little bit. And you still, of course, want them to practice all of the correct behaviors and social distancing and getting tested if they have symptoms and all of those behaviors. But, his thought was, this is going to be around, and, we need to start acclimating to it. And the country of Sweden kind of has that broader approach overall. They have had, I think they have about 18,000 cases of people infected. They have, a pretty, relative to other countries in Europe, a lower number of deaths per capita. But their whole thing, they don't social distance. Nothing's closed. And so it just is a kind of thing where, that's what they feel, is that no one knows. No one knows what's going to be the right approach and when's the right time. So why not now? Well, it looks like it's time to take another break. We're going to do that. And when we come back, we're going to talk about JC Penney and how they're being affected and what they're looking at in the near future. So we'll be back in just a moment.
I want to talk to you guys about this amazing product I've been using lately called Hydrant. If you're like me and you want to kick the coffee habit, but you're worried about your energy levels depleting, to avoid the morning sluggishness and that midday slump, you need to make sure you're hydrated. It's super important. And that's where I've been using Hydrant. And for 25% off your first order, you can go to drinkhydrant.com and enter promo code GSMC at checkout. Hydrant is basically flavored electrolyte packets you mix directly into your water to make hydrating your body easy and delicious. And what I love about Hydrant, it's backed by research. The formula was developed by Oxford scientists to provide perfectly balanced, efficient hydration. Again, that's drinkhydrant.com and enter promo code GSMC for 25% off your first order. Another really cool thing about Hydrant, there's no synthetic colors or artificial sweeteners. The formula is vegan and you can choose between 3 different flavors or a variety pack. So for all my vegan friendly fellows out there, this one's for you. Again, this is drinkhydrant.com and enter promo code GSMC.
Do you work in the world of marketing and advertising? Are you a media buyer or the owner of an agency? Have you been looking for a podcast to help stay on top of all the goings on of those worlds? The GSMC Marketing News Podcast is dedicated to keeping you up to date on all things concerning marketing and advertising. Get the latest marketing news, from what major businesses have planned for the coming year to the newest trends in advertising, from podcasts, digital and streaming, to the old standbys of radio, television, and billboards. The GSMC Marketing News Podcast has you covered, whether you're a marketing agent or a business trying to expand your brand.
Hi, we're back, and we are going to talk about the latest of what's happening with the beleaguered JC Penney retail department store chain. And it's no surprise that the company is being dramatically impacted by the store shutdowns as a result of the coronavirus lockdown. And JC Penney is basically on the verge of bankruptcy, and they may be looking for a loan as large as $1 billion to carry it through a potential Chapter 11 process. And by the way, this information is per the Wall Street Journal that reported on it. The store shutdowns have basically driven this, but as many know, the chain has been struggling for a number of years to find its footing in the retail world, particularly in this cultural shift towards e-commerce and being able to buy those same things online cheaper and more conveniently. And so JC Penney, like a lot of other brick and mortar retailers, has been struggling to define its space and its brand in this big cultural transition. And so that was happening even before the coronavirus. Enter the coronavirus, and it has to close down, at least temporarily, many of its hundreds of stores. So, as I said, they are looking to get about $1 billion to help carry them over for a Chapter 11 bankruptcy process. And they have apparently about $3.7 billion in debt. Now, I guess the issue is like what happens with other companies who go for funding to get through a bankruptcy case, where the government or the laws are designed to actually help companies stay alive and to get back on their feet. Unfortunately, it's not the case with a lot of companies that do seek this type of help. Nearly half of the more than 50 retailers and supermarkets that have filed for Chapter 11 over the past 15 years closed all of their stores, according to this article, and they went out of business for good. And JC Penney is saying that they don't intend to do that, that they want to keep their stores open and continue. But, you know, the other piece of that is that if you do get a bankruptcy loan, there's typically some type of financial covenant or covenants, and they would mean that, you know, if certain things happened, where the company wasn't meeting the threshold it was supposed to, it can trigger a default, and the company is put on the path to liquidate. That was the case with Toys R Us and with Barney's that had similar situations. So that's part of the risk then of getting a bankruptcy loan, is then having to meet the criteria of these covenants. The other thing that in the JC Penney case that hurts them a good bit is that its shares are way down. I mean, right now their stock shares are below $1, and they are at the point where they may be delisted from the stock exchange as a result of that. And actually, that sort of scenario is happening to some of JC Penney's rivals. Like, for instance, Macy's, which had to close its 700 stores because of the coronavirus, they were cut from the S&P 500, and their credit rating was reduced to junk level. So they are struggling as well right now. They were struggling again before the coronavirus came about in the lockdown, but this certainly didn't help. And I think that's being felt across the retail chains. In fact, just to take a quick look, Neiman Marcus department stores, they're facing some angst and, in fact, may be considering bankruptcy as well because of their current situation. Nordstrom is, taking a hard look at the company. They are not in a situation of having to file for bankruptcy or anywhere near that, but they're still feeling the effects, as is Kohl's and Dillard's, who evidently still are okay or seem believed to be okay in terms of staying liquid this year, despite the coronavirus. Sears has restructured since their bankruptcy. They are still in the process of selling off some of the business. But they're reevaluating as well. So I think all of your major chains are deeply impacted by this and are looking at, how they're going to survive in this space. But, truthfully, they've been dealing with this now for a while, and it's not only the impact of e-commerce, but, you consider other things like there are now companies like Stitch Fix who will put together outfits for people. It's like a monthly subscription service. There's also clothing rental companies like Rent the Runway, who incidentally, like other e-commerce companies, they are also being impacted by the coronavirus because with people working at home, they don't have as much need to have newer fashions and work clothes. As we know, many of us are at home in our sweats and very casual attire. And and that's probably not going to be anything that's going to go away altogether quickly. So the future of the workplace and what people will need to dress in it will also have a bearing, obviously, on these retail chains. So it's kind of early yet to predict how this will ultimately affect the retail chains. But chances are, if they were struggling before coronavirus and now during it, it's not looking great going forward, particularly, as I said, with the changed workforce. So it's time for another commercial break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about Apple and a delay for its newest iPhone. Be back in a moment.
You really can't underestimate the importance of having the right creative work for your brand or your product. Whether it's a logo, a website, a book cover, or an ad campaign, you really need a quality design to make that big difference pop and deliver your overall engagement and success in a competitive market. That's where Design Crowd comes in. Design Crowd has over 750,000 designers from Sydney to San Francisco ready to help you with awesome creative ideas. They make crowdsourcing work for you. So if you need a logo or you're working on your creative branding, you can go to designcrowd.com and post a brief describing the design you need. And then within about 2 to 7 days, you'll receive up to over 100 different designs from designers around the world. Then you pick the best design and approve payment to the designer. So you're only paying for the design that you want. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of freelancing and out of crowdsourcing. And you don't have to be a huge company like Harvard Business School to use Design Crowd, although they have used it as well. You can start a project on Design Crowd for as little as $99. And if you go right now to designcrowd.com/health and wellness or enter the promo code health and wellness on their website, then our health and wellness listeners will receive up to $150 off of your design project. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness or entering that promo code health and wellness.
Hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Hi, I'm back. And what would be a business news report without mentioning the latest coming from Apple? And in this case, there was a story today in the Wall Street Journal saying that the newest Apple iPhone would be delayed. It's expected to come out in September, as is the typical timing that they release their newest iPhone. But the company apparently has said that they expect at least a month delay in terms of the manufacturing. Apparently, they produce their iPhones, or they do a lot more manufacturing during the summer months in anticipation of the fall rollout, the September rollout. This time around, it looks like it could be October or even November before the iPhone 12 would be available. Now, some interesting things about the iPhone 12. We don't know a lot about it, but there's some speculation that it will have 5G connectivity. And that, of course, has been highly anticipated, that a lot of the new phones coming out in the future are going to have 5G as the minimum. But this would be the first Apple offering of 5G connectivity. That's not confirmed, by the way, and it's possible that if there is 5G, it could be as part of one of the other 4 iPhones that it's expected to release later this year as well. They're looking at 4 other iPhones that would be basically retooled versions of, I think, the iPhone 11. These would be, they're looking at ones that would have a phone screen size of 5.4 inches, 2 that would be 6.1 inch, and then one, a larger size phone that would be 6.7 inches. So those are what's expected later this year. So I guess at this point that would look like December, depending on, again, when the 12 comes out. So it's interesting to see. Now the company, it's saying that it's because of reduced consumer demand, but there also are factors that the people that work on the iPhones from this country and go to China, go back and forth to, check on the manufacturing and do that. Well, naturally, travel has been restricted, particularly to those hot zones in China. And so that issue, I can't imagine that the shutdown in China, which has now been lifted, that didn't play a role as well. You consider that they are producing pretty much all their phones over there, manufacturing them. So it's got to have an impact then on the latest, or the new launch expected in the fall. They do, however, have the iPhone SE, which was announced a few weeks back, that they started to take orders on. I'm not sure if they're currently being delivered, but this is the more affordable iPhone that's price point of $399, and it's supposed to be like a more stripped down version, about the size of the iPhone 8, but with a home button, for those people who really miss having that. If you're familiar with the iPhones, you know that these more recent versions don't have that home button that was kind of standard for a long time with the earlier models, and it does take a little getting used to. I had a kind of a big jump from, I think I went from a 6S up to the 11, so it was a little bit of a change for me, but it's not a big deal. I see the advantages of it, so that's good. Like anything with technology, you acclimate pretty quickly and become a quick fan of the new improvements to it. So don't mean to sound like I'm biased about iPhones. I know that Androids are great as well and have features that we've been trying to catch up to in some ways with iPhone. But in any case, the new ones are in the works, but we're just not going to see them right away. And I think this is going to really show us overall, what the impact is of the shutdown in China, and then has rippled throughout the rest of the world in terms of manufacturing and having to close up. And the Chinese factories who've been back to work, of course, they're facing reduced demand for their products from the rest of the world who's been shut down dealing with the coronavirus. So, the supply chain is waiting for the demand in order to catch up. So this is just one of those areas where we're really going to see it because, of course, that's where the phones are largely manufactured. But the company was saying in this article that the reason for the delay is reduced demand. And I can only imagine, they're obviously making projections right now based on what's happening now, but it will be interesting to see once we do get into September just how much people are willing to spend and are hungry for the newest iPhone. I think we're seeing a lot of changes in behaviors from consumers because of this pandemic, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in some recent numbers that came out talking about consumer spending. We'll talk about that later on in this podcast. But in terms of cell phones, I know that there's probably certain tried and true rules around who's buying them every time there's a new upgrade available. But this isn't the normal, typical time. So who knows if those same rules will apply and all those hungry Apple users will still be flocking to the stores to put in their orders for the new phone. Time will tell. So as I mentioned, we have some other things coming up in this podcast. Consumer behaviors is one of them. But we're going to take a commercial break. And when we come back, we're actually going to give a little update about artificial intelligence and its role in fighting the corona pandemic.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
I'm back. So, like Apple, as one of the mainstays of my recent podcasts, another topic that bears touching on and giving the latest information on is on artificial intelligence and tracking. We've talked about before the fact that, many of the state plans as well as business reopening plans are centered around testing and making sure that their workers are safe, that they're not bringing the illness into the workplace, and they're being cared for, that they, if they are exposed or infected, that they do get the treatment that they need, and we can get this pandemic under control. So artificial intelligence, there are always new developments on that front. There are a couple of new products that I've read about recently that I thought were worth mentioning. One is called, and I'm not sure exactly how they say it, you would read it like Smart Video, but it's smartvid.eo. And it basically assesses safety at a work site for construction companies. So it provides a software system that detects if people are closer than they should be, and they look at a model of two people, and are they at least one person length apart, and they're using that as sort of the guide in order to track how social distancing is working in a construction environment. There's another company called DishT Technologies, and they also provide an enterprise-wide software that does much of the same kind of thing. So those were some new ones that I just recently learned about. But, in terms of how artificial intelligence is used in tracking, you have, of course, the Apple-Google partnership that's been talked about a lot. Apple and Google announced the partnership a few weeks ago, I believe, and they were working on something where they could use it across the iPhone and Android platforms as a way to look at contact tracing and developing an app for that would work on both platforms. And so recently they had released an API that would allow iPhones and Android developers to create a contact tracking app. Now, this technology relies on Bluetooth technology, where you have the iPhones being able to communicate to each other through Bluetooth technology. And what they would do is they would, your phone would be able to connect with another phone and determine if there's a risk of exposure of an individual to someone who tested positive for COVID-19. And so the whole intent behind that is for medical systems, throughout whatever area this would be deployed, where they could look at, they could do some quick contact tracing to figure out, who's been exposed and who's in need of further testing to validate whether or not they do have COVID-19. So this has raised, of course, some skepticism that this could be, Big Brother watching you, your phone giving information about yourself, personal information to someone else, and government having that information. And then even if you believe in the reason for that data transfer being used to fight the corona pandemic, what would stop the government or others from using this information for other purposes down the line? And that whole idea of function creep, as they say. So when something goes beyond what its intended use was for. But the developers, or Apple and Google, in developing this, have addressed it, have set it up in such a way that you have to opt in to use it. So it's not that someone's going to automatically install this on your smartphone. It's something that you opt in. Privacy and this ability to opt in was an important factor for different countries in Europe who were considering using this technology from Apple and Google. They wanted to make sure that there was a privacy-friendly approach to using this tracking app, and the United Kingdom, France, and Germany all wanted Apple and Google to they wanted to use their system, but they wanted them to make some modifications in order for them to feel comfortable with using it. And at the same time, they were all using their own type of tracking, or they were looking at different models for that, and they wanted to be able to integrate it with the Apple Google. I got to find a quicker, easier way to say that. There probably is a name for that project, and I just don't know what it is right now. So if somebody out there knows it, please mention it in a comment on our Facebook page or Twitter or something. But in any case, the Apple Google tracking software or app has gotten a lot of attention in Europe, and actually at this point in time, those three countries that I mentioned, United Kingdom, France, and Germany, are working with the tracking system, the tracking app, because it has addressed the concerns that they had. Meanwhile, other countries in Europe, Austria, Switzerland, Estonia, they've developed their own types of tracking systems which uses a decentralized model, decentralized protocol, which they call DP3T. And but now apparently this will be able to be used with the other tracking system as well. So you figure in Europe, with their countries' close proximity to each other, they need to really have a compatible system. And so it would seem that some of the privacy concerns and the fact that it is an opt-in type of program, that the privacy concerns are being addressed. So anyway, that's the latest on that being used throughout the world, or at least in Europe. I don't have an update at this point as to where it stands in the United States, although I think that if I'm not sure if it is something that would be adopted at a state level or how that would actually get used. Again, if it's something that you opt into, perhaps it doesn't need necessarily state approval. So again, if you have information on that you could help me with, I would really appreciate it. And you can do that by leaving comments on the Facebook page or Twitter, or you could email us at GSMC Podcast Network. Well, that brings us to our next commercial break. And when we come back, we are going to talk about consumer behaviors and some recent numbers that came out that show us what we kind of already know and what we're living through, what we're witnessing, and our own behaviors around spending. But we're going to get a little more into that. So I'll be back in a moment.
The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, the show that gives you advice on everything travel. We explore places you've always wanted to go, as well as giving tips for traveling in those places. We'll give you advice on the best sites for travel tips, information, and discounts. Join us as we travel the world, explore cultures, and meet new people. The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Travel Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Well, here we are in our last segment of today's podcast, and we're talking about consumer spending. And probably some of the things that I'll mention and touch on won't come as a complete surprise to you, but at least there'll be some validation of what we've known anecdotally. The New York Times recently did some data analysis based on data it got from the Earnest Research Group, and they looked at the credit card and debit card purchases made by about 6 million consumers across the United States. So just again to clarify, this does not reflect any cash purchases. However, when you figure 97% of the country being in lockdown, a lot of purchases are probably being made by credit card or debit card anyway. So if you heard nothing more about the details of this report, I guess the headline is grocery spending up, travel spending way down. And I'm sure, again, that doesn't come as a surprise. Where you've had some companies like Walmart and Amazon and Uber Eats have seen a tremendous spike. We've seen the other side of that too, as I talked about earlier with the retail industry and companies like JC Penney and Macy's and others. They're, of course, feeling the effects the other direction. So I just want to give you some highlights to this. So overall, as I said, groceries is probably the one area that has shined the most. And you figure that's one of our most basic needs is food. So it's not that surprising that in a time of crisis that's where we're putting our money. Health and beauty, entertainment, restaurants, transportation, shopping, travel, they are all down, with travel being way down. You have, when you figure too, also, a consideration with this is you have now 22 million people unemployed during the course of the lockdown so far. I hate to put that caveat in so far, but that's the reality. That reflects mainly, mid-March through about a week and a half ago. So the number may be, the number's likely to be higher this Thursday when we get the latest figures. But that, of course, probably has a big impact on spending. In terms of what we're buying at grocery stores, well, no surprise, we're buying toilet paper. We're buying the things that we need to kind of, the staples like pasta and flour, soap. There's even a new popularity again for processed foods and canned goods, which were the evils of the of the food world. But now they're become more staples again because they're of course easier to store. Because you don't want to have to go to the grocery store more than you absolutely have to, so you're going to want to stock up. But in looking at groceries in general and the ways that we get them, and the fact that, for those of us who are not getting takeout as much and we can't go to restaurants, we're cooking more. So that's why we have to buy more. So in some of the analysis shows that warehouse clubs has seen kind of a modest increase, supermarkets, discount grocers, Alcohol companies, Bevmo, Vivino, Saucy, those have gone up probably, close to 20% more. Meal kits, companies like Blue Apron, they've also gone up considerably. And online grocers, I'm sure that's a shock to people. Companies like Instacart, Fresh Direct, Walmart online grocery, there's a lot of them that will deliver the groceries to you. So they're probably the biggest winner in all of this, with a good 75% amount of increased sales or spending. Sales. By contrast, of course, you have the airlines down, edging closer to 100% drop in sales. That's mainly legal. People are not supposed to be traveling. So, that's naturally why that would be down. And goes with that is lodging. And cruises, of course, they are down dramatically. Online travel agencies and rental cars in general are down. And these show losses or declines in spending greater than 50%. So it's pretty significant. And right there along with it, to no one's surprise, I'm sure, is restaurant dining. You have fine dining down pretty dramatically, edging towards 100% decline in sales. Casual dining, fast food. By contrast, delivery services for food, that's gone up close to 50% in increase of sales there. When it comes to media and entertainment, it's a little mixed. Mostly when you consider a lot of the live events, to no one's surprise again, that's been way down because they've been forced to shut down. Movie theaters, events and attractions, toys, book retailers, arts and crafts, music, sporting goods, they are all down. Even social media and dating sales are down. By contrast, ebooks, news media, music streaming, video streaming, gaming, they are all up considerably. And finally, as I mentioned before, well, not finally, but I guess another big area to look at is retail and brick and mortar stores. And as we said before, the department store chains have been particularly hit hard. They are down dramatically. They're like at the top of the list for declines, and breaks down by different categories under that, from eyewear to plus size fashion, jewelry, shoes and other things. So that's way down. The probably the one it's still down but not as bad as the others is electronics. There was some news a while ago that in fact Amazon was anticipating moving its Prime Day, and I'm not sure if they made this announcement officially or not, but they were moving their Prime Day, which they've been holding in July for the past 5 years that they've had it, to August. And part of the reason for that was cited was that they would have a greater inventory of electronics and things that are obviously very slow in sales right now. So that could be a good thing. It could be a good time to buy in August, and hopefully many of those 22 million will be back to work, at that time. And speaking of back to work, naturally transportation has steeply declined in terms of spending as well, from taxis to rideshare to parking, mass transit, all of that is down. And another area that is down quite a bit, but we should expect to see come back up when the bans for distancing or for going out will be lifted is healthcare for the elective surgeries, the dentist appointments, the specialists that we see. So some of those things, as I said, like transportation and healthcare, I think we can expect will come back up quite a bit when we start returning to work and offices start opening up. But in the meantime, I guess you can look at it as we're saving money. That's probably the best spin on it right now. Well, that brings us to the end of today's podcast. I want to thank you for joining me. And I also want to invite you to please share your thoughts and comments on our Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram pages. And please join us again for the GSMC Business News Podcast on the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Paula DuPont, and thanks so much for being with me today. Bye.
You've been listening to the GSMC Business News Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type GSMC into your favorite podcast app to find all of the shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, from business news to weird news. Please subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's podcast.